The morning before the crisis began, Captain Michelle Hartwell stood on the observation deck of the Earth Station Meridian, looking out into the vast emptiness of space. She had always found peace in these moments, watching the stars twinkle against the black void. Her reflection stared back at her in the reinforced glass, a woman of 34 years with sharp eyes and weathered skin that spoke of countless missions to hostile territories. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight braid, a practical style that fit her no-nonsense approach to life. The space station had been her home for 7 years. It served as a diplomatic hub between Earth and the growing coalition of alien worlds that had begun to accept humanity into the galactic community. The facility was massive, a sprawling structure of interconnected corridors and chambers that housed thousands of personnel from dozens of different species. Michelle had worked her way up from a simple security officer to the position of captain of station security, a role she took very seriously. On this particular morning, she was reviewing new intelligence reports about the Shadow Empire that had been destabilizing several sectors of the galaxy. The Shadow Empire was not a nation or a government in the traditional sense. It was a network of criminal organizations and rogue governments that profited from chaos and war. They operated in the shadows, their membership secret, their methods ruthless. The Galactic Council had been warning all member stations to remain vigilant for infiltrators and saboteurs. Michelle did not know that her vigilance would be tested far sooner than she expected. The emergency alert came through at exactly 1400 hours. It was not the standard intruder alarm that Michelle had heard many times before during drills. This was something different, something more urgent. The alarm screamed through the corridors with a distinctive pattern that meant a direct threat to station infrastructure. Michelle's hand moved immediately to her communication device. She pulled up the station's security feeds and saw chaos spreading through the lower levels. Explosions erupted near the engine core. The backup generators that kept the defensive shields operational began to fail one after another. Someone on the inside was tearing the station apart from within. Michelle felt her stomach drop as she realized the truth. The Shadow Empire had gotten inside. They had planted saboteurs months or even years ago, people so deeply embedded in the station's systems that no one had noticed them. She issued orders to all security teams, mobilizing them to critical locations. Then she moved through the corridors herself, heading toward the cargo bays. Her instincts told her that whoever had orchestrated this attack wanted something specific. They were not trying to destroy the station randomly. This was a surgical strike, precisely executed to create maximum chaos while achieving a specific objective. As she ran through the corridors, Michelle's mind was working through the possibilities. What would be worth attacking a major Earth Defense Force installation? What would be worth risking retaliation from the entire coalition? Then she remembered a communication she had received the day before from the diplomatic office. Princess Alyssa of the Elven Kingdoms was scheduled to arrive at the station in secret. She was coming to testify before the Galactic Council about crimes she had witnessed. Crimes committed by members of the Shadow Empire itself. Crimes that would topple governments and destroy empires. Michelle realized what was happening. The Shadow Empire was trying to silence the princess before she could speak. They were trying to eliminate the only witness to their greatest sins. The cargo bay doors were sealed when Michelle arrived, but she had override codes. She punched them into the security panel and watched as the massive doors groaned open. What she saw inside made her breath catch in her throat. The princess was small compared to what Michelle had expected. She had read the files and seen the holographic images, but seeing Alyssa in person was different. The elf woman stood no more than 5 feet and 4 inches tall, with a lithe frame that seemed almost fragile. Her silver hair caught the harsh light of the cargo bay, glowing like moonlight. Her skin had a faint luminescence to it, a pale blue undertone that was beautiful and alien at the same time. But it was the princess's 2 dragons that commanded Michelle's attention. She had read about the creatures. The files said they were bonded to the royal family, magical creatures that had existed since before the Elven Kingdoms had been established. Inferno was the larger of the 2, his scales a deep crimson color that shifted to orange and yellow along his wings. Shadow Mist was darker, her scales a deep purple that looked almost black in certain light. Both creatures were massive, their heads alone larger than a human being, their wings folded against their bodies in the confined space. The princess looked up at Michelle with violet eyes that were filled with pain and fear. She was bleeding, the emerald blood of her people dripping onto the cold metal floor. The assassination attempt had already happened. The Shadow Empire's assassins had struck within the station itself and had nearly succeeded in their mission. Michelle did not hesitate. She had always believed that morality was not dependent on species or origin. Right was right and wrong was wrong, regardless of who was committing the actions. She lowered her weapon and approached slowly, her hands open to show she meant no harm. The dragons hissed at her approach, their massive heads swiveling to track her movement. Michelle could feel the heat radiating from Inferno's body, could sense the barely contained magical power flowing through Shadow Mist's form. She had never been this close to actual dragons before, and part of her recognized that she might die in the next few seconds if the creatures decided she was a threat. But Princess Alyssa raised a hand, and the dragons quieted. She did not speak, but her gesture made it clear that Michelle was not an enemy. The princess watched as Michelle approached, her violet eyes studying the human woman's face. Reading, her intentions searching for deception or hidden weapons, Michelle knelt down beside the princess, careful to move slowly and deliberately. She looked at the wounds on Alyssa's shoulder and arm. The gashes were deep, cut by something that had burned as it sliced through the elf woman's flesh. Some kind of plasma blade, Michelle guessed. The assassins had been professionals. Michelle extended her hand, palm open, just as she had in the original story. She spoke in calm, measured tones. "My name is Michelle Hartwell," she said. "I am the captain of security on this station. I know you have no reason to trust me. I know your people have been warned about humans. I know your world teaches you to fear my kind. But I promise you, on the honor of humanity, and on the graves of my ancestors, that I will protect you, or I will die trying." The princess looked at the offered hand. Her eyes were still filled with pain, but something else was there too. Something that looked like recognition, like understanding. This human woman was risking her career and possibly her life to help an alien princess. The princess reached out and took Michelle's hand. Her hand was warm and delicate, but also incredibly strong. Michelle could feel the power flowing through the elf woman's body, a magical energy that seemed to vibrate at a frequency that made Michelle's teeth ache. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. The sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridors outside the cargo bay. The assassins were getting closer. Michelle could hear the blast of their weapons striking doors and walls as they advanced toward their quarry. They had reinforcements now. The Shadow Empire had sent more killers to finish what the first assassination attempt had failed to complete. Michelle helped the princess to her feet and guided her toward the cargo bay's secondary exit. The dragons followed close behind, their massive bodies moving with surprising grace despite the confined space. Inferno had to crouch low to fit through the doorways, his wings scraping against the frame, leaving scorch marks from the flames that flickered at the edges of his scales. As they moved through the corridors, Michelle's mind was already working on the next steps. She needed to get the princess somewhere safe, somewhere that could be defended. She needed to contact the Earth Defense Force fleet and get reinforcements to the station. She needed to find the saboteurs and shut down their operation before they could do any more damage. But most importantly, she needed to make sure that Princess Alyssa survived long enough to testify about the Shadow Empire's crimes. She needed to make sure that the truth would come out, that the galaxy would know what horrors had been perpetrated by the forces that operated in darkness and shadow. The assassins fired at them from multiple angles. Michelle returned fire with precision and accuracy, her military training taking over. She had trained for combat situations hundreds of times, but she had never fought to protect someone like this. She had never fought to protect someone who mattered to her survival, someone who represented hope for her entire species. Princess Alyssa moved with them, not slowing them down despite her wounds. The elf woman seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. She seemed to understand that they both had to survive this day, that survival meant more than just living through the next few hours. It meant something that extended far beyond either of them as individuals. They reached the residential quarters of the station, where Michelle maintained her private chambers. It was not far from. The first hours inside the sealed chamber were tense and uncertain. Michelle monitored the station's security feeds on her personal terminal, watching as battles erupted in different sectors. The Shadow Empire's saboteurs and assassins were spreading chaos throughout the facility, but they were also meeting resistance. The station's security teams, despite being caught off guard, were rallying and organizing counterattacks. The automated defense systems that Michelle had designed were proving to be more effective than the attackers had anticipated, but the defense would not hold forever. The assassins were too well trained, too well equipped, and too numerous. Without reinforcements, the station would fall within hours. Without the station's defensive shield generators, which were already failing, the entire facility would be vulnerable to attack from space. Michelle needed to contact the Earth Defense Force fleet and call for immediate assistance. She moved to her communications console and initiated a secure connection to her commanding officer, Admiral Victoria Walsh. The connection took several seconds to establish, which meant someone was jamming the communications channels. The Shadow Empire was thorough in their planning. They had disabled the main transmitters and the backup systems. Michelle was forced to use the emergency communication system, a channel that used an old Earth technology that most modern electronics did not monitor. The Admiral's face appeared on the small screen, her expression stern and focused. Michelle quickly explained the situation. The princess was on the station. Assassins were trying to kill her. The saboteurs had disabled most of the station's defensive systems. They needed backup immediately. Admiral Walsh listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. When Michelle finished, the Admiral nodded slowly. "I am sending the fleet. They will reach your position in 32 minutes. Hold the station until they arrive. Do not let the princess die, Captain. This woman's testimony could reshape the entire political structure of the known galaxy. If the Shadow Empire succeeds in silencing her, the consequences could be catastrophic." The connection ended before Michelle could respond. She looked back at her terminal and calculated the odds. 32 minutes. The station's defenses might hold that long, but it would be close. Very close. Alyssa had been sitting quietly on the edge of Michelle's bed, her hand resting on Inferno's neck. The dragon seemed to sense his bonded princess's distress and was trying to comfort her through touch and presence. Shadow Mist had positioned herself by the door, her eyes never leaving the sealed entrance, ready to defend against any threat that might breach their sanctuary. Michelle explained the situation to the princess. "The reinforcements were on their way," she said. "We just have to survive the next half hour. The Shadow Empire will be looking for you. They will try every way they can think of to reach this room, but I will not let them through." Alyssa looked at the human woman with those violet eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies of emotion. "You will fight for me," she said softly. "You will risk your life for someone you just met. For an alien. For an elf." Michelle nodded. "I will," she said. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because your life has value. Because your testimony matters. Because the Shadow Empire must be stopped." For a long moment, Alyssa said nothing. Then she reached out and took Michelle's hand again, the same way she had in the cargo bay. But this time her grip was different. It was not desperate or seeking help. It was connected and trusting. It was the grip of someone who had made a decision to trust, despite all the cultural conditioning that had taught her to fear and mistrust humans. "My people believe that when one life saves another, a bond is formed," Alyssa said. "A bond that transcends species and culture and time itself. This bond is sacred to us. It cannot be broken. It carries obligations and responsibilities. If you save my life today, Michelle Hartwell, then I am bound to you in a way that your people may not understand. But I will honor that bond with every fiber of my being." Michelle felt something shift inside her chest. She did not fully understand what the princess was saying, not in the deepest sense. She came from a culture where saving someone's life was just the right thing to do, not something that created supernatural obligations. But she understood the spirit of what Alyssa was saying. She understood that in this moment, they were becoming something more than just a human soldier and an elf princess. They were becoming connected in a way that would affect both of them for the rest of their lives. The first serious assault on the room came 15 minutes later. The Shadow Empire's assassins had located Michelle's quarters, and they were determined to break through. The door began to shake under repeated impacts from plasma weapons and explosive charges. The reinforced walls that Michelle had been so proud of were proving their worth, but they would not hold forever. Michelle took up a position by the door, her rifle ready. Alyssa moved to the communications console and began using her own people's technology to interface with the station's systems. The princess had surprising knowledge of Earth systems, picking it up quickly despite the obvious differences from the technology of her own world. She began rerouting power to the door's security locks, strengthening them and making them harder to break through. The dragons were ready too. Inferno's eyes glowed with a deep red light, and flames gathered at the edges of his mouth. Shadow mist seemed to fade slightly, her form becoming less visible in the shadows of the room, though her presence remained as strong as ever. Both creatures understood that battle was coming, and they were prepared to defend their princess and the human woman who had proven herself worthy of trust. The assault intensified. The assassins were using heavy weapons now, not just plasma rifles but full combat exoskeletons that amplified their strength and firepower. The door buckled under the strain. Cracks appeared in the metal frame. Michelle could hear the screech of stressed steel, could feel the vibrations through the floor. She fired through a tiny opening that had appeared in the door frame, aiming for the assassins on the other side. She could see at least 3 of them, their bodies encased in advanced combat armor. She fired with precision and accuracy, but her bullets bounced off their armor plates. These were not ordinary assassins. These were Special Forces operatives, the best that the Shadow Empire could field. But then something happened that changed the nature of the battle. Inferno released a blast of dragonfire through the doorway, a stream of intense flames that ignited the corridor and sent the assassins scrambling backward. The creature's flames were not ordinary fire. They burned with a magical intensity that was far hotter than anything that conventional weapons could produce. The combat armor of the assassins began to melt and warp under the intense heat. The attackers retreated, at least temporarily. But Michelle could hear them regrouping, could hear the sound of additional forces being brought to bear. The Shadow Empire was not going to give up easily. They had invested too much in this operation, put too many resources into eliminating the princess. Alyssa moved closer to Michelle, and they stood together watching the damaged door. The princess was pale, her wounds still fresh and painful, but her resolve did not waver. "We stand together," she said to Michelle. "Your strength and my magic, your courage and my will. Together we are stronger than any force they can throw at us." Michelle wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that somehow, the combination of human determination and elf magic would be enough to survive what was coming. But she was also a realist. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. Without the reinforcements arriving soon, they would be overrun. But she did not say any of this to the princess. Instead, she squeezed Alyssa's hand and said, "We will hold this position. We will survive. And you will testify before the Galactic Council about everything the Shadow Empire has done. That is our mission now, and I do not intend to fail." The assassins attacked again, this time with even greater force. The door finally gave way, the hinges snapping under the repeated assaults. But what greeted the attackers on the other side was not what they expected. Shadow Mist had taken a position directly behind the door, and she was ready. When the barrier fell away, the dragon launched herself through the opening, her massive form flowing through the entrance with surprising grace and speed. She crashed into the lead assassins, knocking them backward, her claws raking through their armor. Inferno released another burst of dragonfire, clearing the corridor and sending the remaining assassins scrambling for cover. Michelle fired through the opening, her shots finding their marks now that the assassins were distracted by the dragons. One of the combat-armored soldiers fell, their armor breached by coordinated attacks from multiple directions. But still, they kept coming. The Shadow Empire seemed to have an endless supply of soldiers and assassins willing to throw themselves at the princess. The battle raged for what seemed like hours, but was actually only minutes. Time moved differently when one was fighting for survival, when every second might be the last. Then, just when Michelle was beginning to think that they might not survive after all, a new sound echoed through the corridor. It was the distinctive roar of Earth Defense Force transport ships. The reinforcements were arriving. After the immediate danger had passed, the station descended into controlled chaos. Earth Defense Force personnel moved through the corridors, securing the facility and treating the wounded. Medical teams arrived at Michelle's quarters within minutes, carrying advanced equipment designed to help all types of beings, not just humans. The elves had their own medical knowledge, but the combination of human technology and elf magic worked together to accelerate Alyssa's healing process. The princess was examined thoroughly by the medical teams. The wounds on her shoulder and arm had been severe, but they were not life-threatening if treated properly. The poison that had been used by the assassins was analyzed and its effects catalogued. It was a specially designed compound, something that had been created specifically to harm beings of elven origin. The Shadow Empire had been preparing for this assassination attempt for a very long time. Michelle stood to the side while the medical examination took place, her body finally acknowledging the adrenaline crash that came after hours of combat and survival. Her hands had started to shake slightly, a delayed reaction to the stress and fear that had driven her through the crisis. She had fought hard, had made decisions that had probably saved lives. But now that the immediate threat had passed, the weight of everything she had done began to settle on her shoulders. Admiral Walsh arrived at the station personally, taking command of the security operations and beginning a full investigation into how the Shadow Empire had managed to infiltrate the facility so completely. The Admiral was a tall woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen decades of military service. She looked at Michelle with an expression that contained respect, approval, and also a kind of knowing sadness. After reviewing the security footage and interviewing Michelle about the events of the day, Admiral Walsh pulled her aside into a private office. The Admiral closed the door and gestured for Michelle to sit. The younger woman sat stiffly, uncertain what was coming next. She had violated several protocols in her actions today. She had acted without explicit orders, had made decisions that could have resulted in the destruction of the station and the death of everyone aboard. But Admiral Walsh did not reprimand her. Instead, the older woman smiled slightly and said, "You did the right thing today, Michelle. More than that, you did something remarkable. You did something that goes beyond military protocols and regulations. You saw someone in need and you helped them, knowing that it might cost you everything. That is what separates good soldiers from great ones." Michelle felt tension drain from her body. "Thank you, Admiral," she said. "I just did what I thought was right." "That is exactly what you did," the Admiral said, "and it will have consequences. Good consequences. Princess Alyssa has requested that you be present when she gives her testimony to the Galactic Council. She has also requested that you be recognized as a hero of the Elf Kingdoms. Your actions today have accomplished something that we have been trying to achieve for decades. You have proven to the elves and to many other species in this galaxy that humanity deserves respect and trust." The Admiral stood and walked to the window that overlooked the space around the station. She pointed to several ships that were arriving through hyperspace. "These are elf vessels," she said. "They are here to retrieve Princess Alyssa and to assess the damage that has been done to the station. But they are also here to show their support for what you did. They are here to say thank you to humanity." Over the next several hours, more and more ships arrived. Some were from the Elf Kingdoms, their sleek vessels designed with magical technology that human engineers could barely comprehend. Others were from different species that had been warned about the Shadow Empire's intentions. The galactic community was rallying around the princess, showing their support and their determination to protect her testimony. Michelle was allowed to rest briefly in the medical bay while her own injuries were treated. She had several cuts and bruises, a small burn on her arm from Inferno's flames, and a possible concussion from being knocked down during the assault. The doctors insisted that she stay overnight for observation, though she protested that she was fine and that she had work to do. But before she could settle into the medical bed, a visitor arrived. Princess Alyssa appeared in the medical bay, moving slowly but with determination. The princess was dressed in fresh clothes now, provided by the elf delegation that had arrived with the supporting ships. The emerald blood had been cleaned from her skin and hair. The wounds on her shoulder and arm were bandaged with material that seemed to shimmer with magical energy. Michelle sat up quickly when the princess entered. "Your Highness," she said, using the formal title that protocol demanded, "you should be resting. Your wounds require more time to heal." Alyssa smiled at the human woman. "Protocol be damned," the princess said. "I do not wish to rest. I wish to spend time with the woman who saved my life. The woman who risked everything to protect me." The princess sat on the edge of Michelle's medical bed, moving carefully to avoid aggravating her wounds. She reached out and took Michelle's hand again. a gesture that was becoming familiar and comfortable between them. Michelle noticed that Inferno and Shadow Mist had followed the princess into the medical bay, positioning themselves on either side of the bed like loyal sentinels. "I have been speaking with Admiral Walsh," Alyssa said. "She has told me much about you. She has told me that you serve your people with honor and dedication. She has told me that you are the kind of human that my people need to know exists. For so long we have believed all humans to be cold and mechanical, lacking in compassion and spirituality. You have shown me that this belief was wrong." Michelle did not know what to say. She had done what she thought was right, but she had not done it expecting praise or recognition. She had done it because someone had needed help, and help was what she could provide. "My people have a tradition," Alyssa continued. "When one saves the life of someone from the royal family, that person is invited to the elf kingdoms to be celebrated and honored. I would very much like to extend this invitation to you, Michelle Hartwell. I would like you to come to my kingdom and meet my people. I would like them to know the woman who showed such remarkable courage." Michelle was stunned. She had not expected any of this. She was a soldier, a woman who followed orders and did her duty. She was not a diplomat or a representative of her species. How could she possibly represent humanity to an entire kingdom of elves? But looking into Alyssa's violet eyes, Michelle saw something that changed her mind. She saw sincerity and hope. She saw a genuine desire to bridge the gap between their peoples. She saw the beginning of a friendship that transcended species and culture, and all the things that should have kept them apart. "I would be honored," Michelle said, "to visit your kingdom, to meet your people, to help build a bridge between our worlds." Alyssa smiled, and the smile contained warmth and joy that made the princess look almost human despite her alien features. "Then it is settled," she said. "And Michelle, I would like you to know something. I was trained from childhood to fear and distrust humans. I was told that your species was warlike and primitive, that you lacked the spiritual depth of the elder races. I believed these things. I believed them with absolute certainty. But you have taught me that beliefs, no matter how strongly held, can be wrong. You have taught me that there is goodness in the human heart that deserves to be recognized and honored." The two women sat together in the medical bay for hours, talking and getting to know each other. Michelle told Alyssa about her childhood, about growing up on Earth and joining the military. Alyssa told Michelle about the elf kingdoms, about the vast forests where her people lived, about the magic that flowed through her world and powered everything from the simplest healing to the most complex spells. Inferno and Shadow Mist remained close by, occasionally making soft rumbling sounds that seemed to be expressions of contentment. The dragons had accepted Michelle as part of their circle, an honorary member of the princess's inner circle. This acceptance carried weight and meaning that Michelle would only come to fully understand later, when she learned more about the bonds that dragons formed with humans. As the night progressed, the two women grew more comfortable with each other. The formal barriers that separated them began to crumble. The fear and suspicion that had initially existed between them dissolved in the face of genuine connection and mutual respect. By the time Admiral Walsh arrived in the morning to brief them on the day's schedule, Michelle and Alyssa were sitting together on the medical bed, with Inferno's head resting gently on the edge of the mattress and Shadow Mist curled up on the floor beside them. They looked like they had known each other for years, not hours. The Admiral took in the scene with a knowing look. "It seems like the two of you have become quite close," she said with a hint of amusement in her voice. Michelle and Alyssa exchanged glances, and both of them smiled. "We have," Alyssa said simply. "We have found something rare and precious. We have found understanding where there was fear. We have found connection where there was division." Admiral Walsh nodded slowly. "Then I am happy for both of you," she said, "and I believe that this connection will prove to be invaluable." The night before Princess Alyssa's testimony proved to be one of the most significant nights of Michelle's life. The princess had been released from the medical bay that afternoon, her wounds healing at a remarkable rate thanks to the combination of human medical technology and elf magical healing. Michelle had been given special leave from her duties, a rare occurrence that highlighted the importance of her role in the events that were unfolding. Alyssa had asked Michelle to dine with her privately, away from the eyes of military personnel and diplomatic observers. They sat in the observation deck where Michelle had stood just yesterday, looking out into space and contemplating the mysteries of the universe. The irony of the location was not lost on either of them. So much had changed in just a few hours. The princess had arranged for the station's kitchen to prepare a meal that incorporated both human and elf cuisine. There were elements of traditional Earth food, carefully prepared with respect for human palates, alongside dishes from Alyssa's homeworld that Michelle had never encountered before. Some were familiar in concept but alien in execution, while others challenged Michelle's understanding of what food could be. One dish in particular caught Michelle's attention. It was a crystalline substance that seemed to glow faintly from within, emitting a soft blue light. When Michelle looked at it questioningly, Alyssa explained that it was a delicacy from the elf kingdoms, something prepared from plants that grew in the deep, magical forests of her homeland. She encouraged Michelle to try it, and when the human woman touched the crystal to her lips, it dissolved on her tongue into a flavor that was indescribable. It was not sweet or savory, but something that transcended normal categories of taste. It seemed to fill her with warmth and energy, as if the very essence of the magical forest had been captured in the food. "This is what it feels like to be connected to magic," Alyssa explained. "When you eat this, you experience a fraction of what we elves feel all the time. Magic is not something separate from our lives. It is woven into everything we do, everything we are. It is as natural to us as breathing is to you." Michelle found the experience profound. She tried to articulate what she was feeling, but language seemed inadequate. The closest she could come was to say that she felt more alive than she had ever felt before, that her senses seemed sharper and more aware, that the world around her seemed to contain depths that she had never noticed before. Alyssa watched the human woman experience the magic and smiled. "You are adapting remarkably well to elf culture," she said. "Many humans would reject what they do not understand immediately. You embrace it with an open mind." Michelle set down the crystalline dish and looked at the princess. "I have learned that when I do not understand something, the best course of action is to try to understand it rather than to reject it. Fear and hatred grow from ignorance. Understanding and respect grow from the willingness to learn." The princess leaned forward slightly, her violet eyes reflecting the light of the observation deck. "This is why I trust you, Michelle. This is why I'm asking you to stand beside me tomorrow when I give my testimony. The Shadow Empire will not be happy with what I am about to reveal. They have people everywhere, in every government and every military organization. Your presence beside me tells the galaxy that humanity stands with the truth and with justice. Your presence tells them that we are not alone in this fight." They talked for hours far into the night. The conversation ranged from the deeply personal to the broadly political. Michelle learned about Alyssa's childhood, about growing up in a royal family where duty was paramount and personal desire was often secondary. She learned about the pressure that came with being in line to rule, about the weight of knowing that millions of people depended on your decisions and your leadership. In return, Michelle told Alyssa about her own life. She talked about her parents, both of whom had served in the military before her. She talked about the loneliness of command, about the burden of making decisions that affected the lives of others. She talked about why she had chosen to join the military, about a desire to protect people and to make the universe a safer place for those who could not protect themselves. As midnight approached, Alyssa stood and moved to the window. Shadow Mist had positioned herself behind the princess, and Inferno was resting with his head on the princess's feet. The dragons had been mostly silent throughout the evening, but their presence was comforting and reassuring. "I need to ask you something, Michelle," Alyssa said. "I need to ask you to stay close to me tomorrow, not just as a security officer or as a representative of humanity. I need you to stay close as a friend, as someone I trust, as someone I care about." Michelle stood and moved to stand beside the princess. "Of course," she said. "I will not leave your side." They stood together in silence for a long time, watching the stars twinkle in the vast emptiness of space. Michelle felt something shift inside her heart, something that she was not entirely sure how to name or understand. She cared about this alien woman in a way that transcended duty or military protocol. She cared about Alyssa as a person, as an individual with hopes and dreams and fears just like any human being. The next morning arrived with both of them knowing that everything was about to change. The testimony that Alyssa was about to give would reshape the political landscape of the known galaxy. It would expose corruption and crimes on a scale that few beings could comprehend. It would force the galactic community to confront uncomfortable truths about its own institutions. The Galactic Council chamber was massive, a vast space designed to accommodate delegations from dozens of different species. Representatives from the Earth government were present, along with delegates from the elf kingdoms, the crystal beings from the core planets, the insectoid collectives from the outer territories, and dozens of other species and governments. The chamber was filled with tension and anticipation. Michelle stood to the right of the speaker's platform where Alyssa would testify, her uniform pressed and spotless, her posture formal and rigid. But inside, she was acutely aware of the princess's presence. She could sense Alyssa's nervousness, could see it in the slight tremor of the elf woman's hands, could read it in the way that Alyssa's breathing had become slightly shallow. When the moment came for Alyssa to begin her testimony, the princess took a deep breath and stepped forward. She looked out at the assembled council members and began to speak. Her voice was strong and clear, filled with authority and conviction. She spoke of the Shadow Empire's crimes, of the worlds that had been destroyed, the populations that had been enslaved, the resources that had been stolen. She named names and provided evidence. She described meetings she had witnessed, conversations she had heard, plans she had uncovered. With each revelation, the chamber grew more and more agitated. Some delegates tried to interrupt, but the council's leader, a being of crystalline form who served as the neutral arbiter of galactic disputes, called for order. Michelle watched as Alyssa spoke, and she felt a profound sense of pride. This woman, this elf princess, had the courage to stand in front of the entire galactic community and risk everything to tell the truth. She was putting her life in danger, was making herself a target of the Shadow Empire forever. But she did not hesitate or falter. When Alyssa finished her testimony, there was a moment of complete silence. Then delegates from nearly every government in the chamber began to speak. Votes were called for. Condemnations were issued. The Galactic Council authorized the formation of a special task force to investigate the Shadow Empire's activities and to bring those responsible for crimes against the galaxy to justice. As Alyssa stepped down from the speaker's platform, she looked directly at Michelle. The human woman stepped forward and took the princess's hand. In that moment, in front of the entire Galactic Council, Michelle and Alyssa stood together. The gesture said everything that words could not. The camera crews from 100 different news organizations captured that moment. It was broadcast across the galaxy within hours. The image of a human woman and an elf princess standing together, united in their determination to see justice done, became the defining image of the Galactic Council session. It became the symbol of a new alliance, a new partnership between humanity and the elder races of the galaxy. Later, after the chamber had emptied and the delegations had begun to disperse, Admiral Walsh found Michelle and Alyssa in a private waiting area. The Admiral was smiling, something that Michelle rarely saw from the stern military officer. "You have done it," the Admiral said. "You have accomplished something remarkable. The political fallout from this testimony is going to be significant. The Shadow Empire is going to be exposed and dismantled, and it would not have been possible without the two of you." Alyssa squeezed Michelle's hand gently. "Humanity has shown itself to be worthy of trust," the princess said. "Your people have shown that honor and courage transcend species and culture. When this is over, when the Shadow Empire has been brought to justice, I would like to propose a formal alliance between the Elf Kingdoms and Earth. I would like our peoples to stand together as partners in protecting the galaxy from those who would exploit and destroy." 3 weeks after the testimony before the Galactic Council, Michelle stood on the observation deck of the Earth Station Meridian once more. The station had been fully repaired, the damage from the Shadow Empire's sabotage completely corrected. New security systems had been installed, and the facility now had multiple layers of redundant defense that would make any future attack far more difficult to execute. But Michelle was not thinking about the station or its security systems. She was thinking about the invitation that had arrived from Princess Alyssa that morning. The princess was returning to the Elf Kingdoms and had requested that Michelle accompany her. It was not an order or a demand. It was a genuine request, an invitation for Michelle to visit the homeland of the elves and to be introduced to Alyssa's family and people. Admiral Walsh had already approved the assignment. She had given Michelle a month of leave and had made it clear that she considered this trip to be important, not just for Michelle personally, but for the future relationship between humanity and the Elf Kingdoms. Michelle had packed her belongings into a small travel bag and had said goodbye to the station that had been her home for so many years. Alyssa appeared on the observation deck just as the sun began to set over the curve of the planet below. The princess was dressed in traditional elf clothing now, garments that seemed to be woven from moonlight and shadow. The fabric shimmered with its own internal light, and patterns of runes and symbols were embroidered across the hem and sleeves. Inferno and Shadow Mist were with her, their massive forms silhouetted against the fading light. "I have been looking for you," Alyssa said with a smile. "The transport ship is preparing to depart. It is time for us to return home." Michelle turned from the window. "I was just thinking about everything that has happened," she said. "It feels surreal. A month ago, I was just a captain of station security doing my job following my routine. Now I am standing here with an elf princess about to travel to another world." Alyssa reached out and took Michelle's hand, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting between them. "Everything has changed," she said, "but perhaps it was always meant to change. Perhaps our meeting was not a matter of chance but of destiny." They made their way through the corridors of the station toward the docking bay, where the elf transport ship was waiting. Crew members and military personnel passed them in the hallways, and many stopped to show their respect to the princess. Others simply watched, curious about the relationship that had formed between the human captain and the elf royalty. Word had spread throughout the station about what had transpired, and most people understood that something significant had occurred, something that would ripple across the galaxy for years to come. The elf transport ship was beautiful in a way that defied easy description. It was not made of metal and composite materials like human vessels. Instead, it seemed to be grown rather than constructed, its hull appearing to be composed of a material that was simultaneously organic and technological. The ship shimmered with an iridescence that changed color depending on the angle of the light, shifting from silver to blue to violet to green. As they approached the boarding ramp, a delegation of elf officials emerged to greet them. They were dressed in formal garments similar to Alyssa's, and they moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. At the head of the delegation was an older elf woman, whose bearing and demeanor immediately identified her as someone of importance. Her silver hair was braided with jewels and precious metals, and her eyes held the weight of centuries of wisdom. "This is my mother, Queen Alara," Alyssa said to Michelle. "Mother, this is Captain Michelle Hartwell of Earth. She is the one who saved my life." Queen Alara studied the human woman with eyes that seemed to see far more than was visible on the surface. She looked at Michelle's face, her posture, her uniform. Then she stepped forward and extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome, Michelle Hartwell," the Queen said. "My daughter has told me much about your courage and honor. I thank you for preserving the life of my child. You have the gratitude of the entire elf kingdom. I hope that this gratitude will serve as the foundation for a lasting friendship between our peoples." Michelle shook the Queen's hand, feeling the warmth of her touch and the subtle flow of magical energy that seemed to radiate from the elf monarch. "I am honored to meet you, Your Majesty," Michelle said. "Alyssa is an extraordinary woman. It has been my privilege to know her." They boarded the transport ship and settled into comfortable chambers that had been prepared for them. Michelle was amazed by the technology inside the vessel. The walls seemed to be alive, responding to voice commands and thoughts, shifting and changing to create whatever environment was desired. The furniture molded itself to the contours of the body, providing support and comfort in ways that human furniture could never achieve. Alyssa showed Michelle to her quarters and then invited the human woman to explore the ship. They walked through corridors where the walls glowed with a soft light that seemed to come from within the material itself. They passed through observation areas where the ship's trajectory through space could be seen from every angle, creating the illusion of floating in the vacuum itself. "What is this place?" Michelle asked, gesturing at the chamber around them. "What is this ship made of?" "It is an ancient form of magic," Alyssa explained. "When the elf kingdoms were young, our people learned to work with the very fabric of existence itself. We learned to coax living materials into forms that could serve our purposes. This ship is alive in its own way, though not conscious or aware. It responds to the will of those who command it, adapts to their needs, protects those who travel within it." Michelle reached out and touched the wall. The material was warm and seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm, like the beating of a heart. In that moment, she understood something fundamental about the elf culture. They did not dominate nature or bend it to their will through force. They worked with nature, they cooperated with it, they created partnerships with the living world around them. Over the next several hours, as the transport ship left the orbit of the station and jumped through hyperspace toward the elf homeland, Michelle and Alyssa spent time together in a small garden chamber. Real plants grew here, transported from the elf kingdoms and maintained through magic and careful cultivation. The sense of exotic flowers filled the air, and the sound of running water from a small fountain created a peaceful atmosphere. Alyssa spoke about her homeland, describing the vast forests where her people lived, the great cities that had been built within the living trees themselves, the magical networks that connected all of elf civilization. She spoke of the responsibility that came with being of royal blood, of the weight of millions of people depending on her decisions and leadership. But she also spoke of her fears. She spoke of the pressure to marry and produce heirs, to secure the succession of the kingdom. She spoke of the loneliness that came from living a life where duty was paramount and personal happiness was often secondary. She spoke of how exhausting it was to always be the princess, to never be able to simply be Alyssa the person, Alyssa the individual. Michelle listened carefully, understanding that the princess was sharing something deeply personal with her. She understood that Alyssa was trusting her with thoughts and feelings that the princess could probably not share with most of the other people in her life. "I have been thinking a lot about something," Michelle said carefully. "I have been thinking about what you said about that bond, the sacred bond that forms when one person saves another's life. I have been thinking about what that means and what it implies." Alyssa looked at Michelle with those violet eyes, waiting for her to continue. "I think," Michelle said, "that perhaps the bond is not just about obligation. I think perhaps the bond is about connection. It is about two people being bound together by something that transcends the normal boundaries between them. It is about caring for someone in a way that goes beyond what words can express." The princess reached over and took Michelle's hand. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, that is what it means. In my culture, the bonded are considered to be closer than siblings, closer than any relationship except possibly that of true love. They would sacrifice everything for each other without hesitation. They would be willing to die to protect each other. They would be willing to face any danger, endure any hardship because the bond is sacred and unbreakable." Michelle felt her breath catch. She understood what the princess was saying. She understood that in some way she and Alyssa had already formed this bond, even if they had not consciously acknowledged it. They had formed it in the moment when Michelle had extended her hand to the dying princess. They had formed it when Michelle had chosen to risk everything to protect someone she had just met. They had formed it through shared danger and shared trust. When they arrived at the Elf Kingdom, Michelle understood immediately why Alyssa spoke so lovingly of her homeland. The world was beautiful beyond anything that human language could adequately describe. The sky itself seemed to shimmer with magical energy, creating auroras of light that danced across the heavens even during the day. The forests were immense, their trees rising higher than Michelle could see, their trunks so vast that they dwarfed the largest redwoods of Earth.